Heartland, Season 1, Episode 3, Breaking Free. Heartland hosts its first ever open house to try and attract new clients to come. Lou secretly invites her father to the event to see Amy for the first time in over 10 years. But when Jack sees Tim, things don't go well, as he's still angry at what happened years ago when he just abandoned Marion and his kids. Amy is given the opportunity to work with the world-famous horse breeder Lisa Stillman's horse Promise. In the middle of the night, Amy heads out to the barn to check the horses over, but when there, she notices her mom's horse Pegasus seems off and rushes to the phone to call Scott, their vet. Scott comes out and examines Pegasus and says everything looks fine. Amy thinks he might be depressed since Marion's passing, as they had a close connection. In the kitchen, Lou is planning an open house to help attract more clients. She wants people to see what Heartland has to offer. Jack hears everything that needs to be done for the event and wishes Lou gave him a heads up so he had more time to complete the jobs. People to see what Heartland has to offer. Jack hears everything that needs to be done for the event and wishes Lou gave him a heads up so he had more time to complete the jobs. Back in the barn, Scott tells Amy a story about Marion and Tim. He explains that her dad was in the rodeo and had an accident that day with one of the bulls. He ended up taking a break for a while. After talking for a little bit, they go back to check Pegasus, and Amy gives him some homemade remedies her mom would use on other horses. Scott says he should be fine overnight and will come back to check on him in the morning. The next day, Ty comes into the barn to find Amy sleeping in Pegasus' stall. He opens the door gently, not to wake her, but ends up scaring her by accident. Amy jumps up after being startled and questions Ty on what he was doing. He explains he was just trying to be nice. Once she's fully awake, she mentions that Scott came by last night and wonders if he heard anything. Ty says he didn't hear anything and could practically sleep through an earthquake. Amy heads over to start getting food ready for the horses and asks Ty for some help. He tells her Jack wants some help picking up the tents for Heartland's event and wants him to go along. Amy heads over to the house to let Lou know she thinks they should cancel the open house, with Pegasus being sick because it doesn't look good. Lou, being in her own little world, thinks everything's fine and things should go ahead as planned. She thinks the event will help drum up business because people will have the opportunity to see what goes on at Heartland. Before leaving, she explains that her friend called her out of the blue and wanted to help by catering their event, and apparently she's a really good cook. Amy gets agitated that Lou's not listening about canceling because she hopes her friend can give her some advice. Lou's fed up with Amy and says she's thankful someone's willing to help. Mallory, who is eavesdropping, hears they need help and comes out asking if there's anything she can do. She looks over in Amy's direction and says there are still people willing to help get ready. Mallory starts to follow Amy around the house, questioning where Ty went. She gets annoyed and explains he went to Briar Ridge with Jack to help pick up the tent. Mallory wonders how long it will take because she's ridden her bike to Heartland and almost passed out due to the heat. Amy gets upset with the non-stop questioning and tells her to be quiet. Over at Briar Ridge, Jack meets with Val, who is standing off to the side, watching one of her new horses try to jump in the ring. She explains she spent good money on this horse and he's been having problems clearing the jumps. While everyone's busy talking, Ty heads over to look at the motorcycle sitting in the driveway. Val's daughter Ashley notices Ty and walks over, wondering if he could take her for a ride. They both get on the motorcycle and take it for a quick spin around town. When Val and Jack hear the noise, they turn their heads around to see Ty and Ashley heading out the lane. When they find out the two are leaving, they get angry and disappointed looks on their faces. Back at Heartland, Mallory hasn't gotten the hint and is still following Amy. When in the barn together, she mentions that Pegasus looks depressed, and she can tell from checking his eyes. Mallory also finds it weird he hasn't touched his feet because when her mom's depressed, all she does is eat. Scott kept his promise and drops by to check Pegasus and bring some good news with him. He mentions that world-famous horse breeder Lisa Stillman might be interested in having Amy check out one of her horses. Amy decides to take the opportunity, as it means she would be gaining another client if things go well. When gone, she tells Mallory to horse-sit Pegasus because she's afraid to leave him alone. Mallory agrees to do the job, as she'll be sitting around waiting for Ty to get back to help her with her horse Copper. When Scott and Amy arrive at Lisa Stillman's place, they get out of the truck and walk over to meet her. Lisa takes one glance at Amy and thinks she's a little young for the job. She questions her on how old she is, and Amy mentions she's 15. Lisa feels uncomfortable letting her work with Promise, as she was hoping for someone older and with more experience. But when hearing about the work she's done with Nick's famous show jumper, and how he had nothing but great reviews, she decides to give Amy a chance. While Lou is having lunch at Maggie's with her high school friend, she ends up running into her father, who happened to also be in town, and invites him to the open house to see Amy. At first he declines her offer, thinking Jack will be there, and the two still don't get along, after he left Marion and just abandoned his kids. For some convincing, she gets her dad to consider coming to the party, as Lou thinks Amy is ready to see him for the first time in over 10 years. After spending time in town, Lou heads home and finds herself busy again, preparing for the open house. Amy comes into the house, excited to tell her sister she's working with the world-famous horse breeder Lisa Stillman's horse Promise. Lou is stressed out with everything going on, turns Amy out, and misses hearing about her. Amy goes on to explain that by working with Lisa, she's bringing in her own business and still thinks they don't need the event anymore. Lou ends up tuning in at the wrong time, and when she hears her sister is trying to cancel again, she tells her they can't. In the middle of their conversation, she freezes and walks away before telling Amy about her dad coming to the party. When working with Promise, Ty comes into the barn and wonders why she's sticking the saddle in his face, as he looks like he's not enjoying it. When working with Promise, Ty comes into the barn and wonders why she's sticking the saddle in his face, as he doesn't look like he's enjoying it. Amy explains she practices this method to help get him used to seeing the saddle, so when someone goes to put it on him, he won't freak out. When staring into his eyes, she wonders why he doesn't have any fear, but just as she says that, he gets worked up, starts to raise his front feet into the air, and Ty quickly pulls Amy out of the stall to prevent her from getting hurt. When pulling her out, Ty's hand randomly happens to be around her waist. Ashley comes over to visit Ty, and when walking into the barn, she notices his hand around Amy's waist, and has a confused look on her face, wondering what's going on between them. She mocks Amy's horse talent and thinks she doesn't have the skills it takes to fix Lisa's horse and should just give up. When Amy hears what Ashley said, she gets angry and leaves the barn to get away from her. Ashley asks Ty if he would like to hang out with her after he's done his chores. Ty declines, saying he can't as he's pretty busy. Ashley just leaves and heads back home. After she's gone, Ty finds Amy and wonders what she's doing. She says she's putting some calming liquid in the horse's feed to see if it helps calm him down. He mentions to Amy she shouldn't listen to Ashley because if anyone can fix a horse, it's going to be her. His compliment ends up putting a smile on both of their faces. When Amy's helping Pegasus, Lou's high school friend comes into the barn and happens to be wearing one of Marion's old coats and looks just like her. When Pegasus sees Marion's coat, he starts to brighten up because he can smell a bit of Marion from the coat. Amy is shocked when she sees everything going on, as it brings back a ton of memories before her mom passed away. Amy decides to take Promise out into the ring to work on getting him used to seeing the saddle. Off in the distance, Jack sees Amy struggling and decides to head over and give her some advice Marion would always say. He explains that her mom used to check out the horse's past to help her figure out what could be wrong. When listening to Jack's tips, she heads to call Promise's previous owners and invites them to Heartland to visit with them and answer her questions. The owner arrives and describes everything he remembers about Promise's past. When listening to him talk about his horse, Amy finds out he used to ride Promise bareback and thinks his trouble with the saddle earlier came from not being used to wearing one. The day at the open house has finally arrived, and Amy decides to use Promise to demonstrate how she worked on fixing his fear of the saddle. When people see her demonstration, they seem to be impressed with her work she can do. But Val sees what's happening. She's not very happy and starts a rumor telling everyone that Amy just drugged him and that's why he's behaving so well for the event. Amy explains the promise is not drugged and that it's not a good idea to do that to a horse. Val's still not happy with Amy, and the two get into a little tiff. Val wants to hurt Amy's reputation and says she should take a look at one of her horses right now and fix it for her, in front of everyone. She mentions that it would take a lot longer than a couple of hours to fix a horse's problem. Val starts to trash talk Amy yet again, but this time Lisa stands up for Amy and tells her to get her horse so she can prove herself. Once the horse arrives, Jack and Ty help set up a small jumping course for her to demonstrate, since that seems to be his problem. He rides the horse around, and when he approaches the first jump, he rears and throws her off, hitting the ground. She lets everyone know that this particular horse doesn't like all the people watching because it reminds him of the way he's being treated over at Briar Ridge. Riding him bareback, Amy sees instant progress and notices he seems to be a lot happier since he's not terrified of the saddle. She continues to work with Promise for a week, and finally he allows her to put a saddle on him without freaking out. When the group of people move out of his sight, he clears the first jump because he's not so nervous anymore. Later that day, Jack thanks Lisa for standing up for Amy. Lisa then mentions to Jack that her sister just went through a nasty divorce and she's offered to take her nephew Ben and thinks it would be good for him to come to Heartland and help since he has great people skills. Ty finds Amy to congratulate her on the work she did with Val's horse. When Amy hears his compliment, she smiles and questions Ty if he thinks Ashley is a spoiled brat, then why did they both take the ride on the motorcycle? When he hears what she said, he gets all defensive, mentioning how great the bike is. While at the party, enjoying himself, Jack looks over towards the barn and notices someone standing there. He walks over to see what they're doing and gets a surprise when he finds out it's Tim Fleming, his ex-son-in-law, who he hasn't spoken to in ages. Jack questions Tim on why he's there, and he says Lou invited him and wants to see Amy as well. Jack is still upset with what happened years ago, and he tells Tim to get off his property right now. He walks away, getting in his truck, and drives away, unable to see Amy. In the end, Lou and Amy's open house was a big success, as Amy was able to show a snippet of what she can accomplish with troubled horses as she used Val's horse for a demonstration and was able to fix him on the spot. Amy also found a way to help Pegasus deal with his depression by letting him sniff her mother's old coat, which has her scent